Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you all have gotten lunch finally. Has everybody got food back there? Everybody set? Well, for those of you who do not know me, I'm Alan Dodds-Frank, the president of the Silurians. It's my pleasure to have Neil Shapiro here, who I think is one of the great newsmen of our era, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute, but let me get through a little Silurians business. First, I'd like to have a moment of silence for Milt Hoffman, who won the Silurians Award, the Peter Keese Award, for being, in 2001, for being a kind of person who really, without waiting or asking or expecting to be thanked, helped countless young journalists in the profession. He was a fine newspaper man, and we have an obit of him on the website, silurians.org. I hope you look it up, or just Google Milt Hoffman. But let's have a moment of silence for Milt. Thank you. Now, here in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we have elections with an unopposed slate. I think you may have read this somewhere, like in the Silurians News, or if you've gone to our website or whatever. Anyway, let me read the slate, and I'm going to ask you all to vote. How's that, huh? Andrew Cuomo would like to have it this way. For president, Betsy Ashton, our first vice president. Betsy, please stand up. She will not take office until sometime after this lunch. No, actually in September. And she's done a fabulous job, as you all know. Yeah, if she gets voted in, that's true. You have a point. Bernie Kirsch, where are you here? Our first nominee for first vice president. The editor of the Silurian News, which I hope you all enjoy. The last issue was great, and I'm sure the next one will be too. Karen Bedrosian Richardson, our treasurer, who's done a fabulous job. Karen, please. Our indefatigable secretary, Linda Amster, who has just done a sensational job. Sitting next to Linda is Mort Scheinman, a former president, absolutely sensational board member who does everything you can imagine, including keeping track of all the members. Mort, please. And another gentleman you all know, and another former president, Myron Kandel. Where are you, Mike? He's returning to the board, although he's been in all the board meetings, because when you're the past president, as he is the immediate past president, you sit there and kibitz, and now he's going to be back to being an official kibitzer, and also does a tremendous amount of work for this club, and I'm very happy to have him and to have known him for decades. I could praise everybody here, but then we want to hear Neil. So the other candidates are Ralph Blumenthal, Jack Dacey, Bill Deal, Gerald Eskenazi, Tony Guida, Linda Getz Holmes, Carol Lawson, Barbara Lovenheim, Ben Petrusky, Ann Rofi, Wendy Schlick. That's it. May I have a vote? The ayes, there's one vote in favor of the slate. So, 2, 3, yeah, there we go. Okay. Thank you. The election has been administered. Congratulations, Betsy. How's that for a great example of democracy? All the dictators should have it so easy. So now I'm going to ask, I could give you a long introduction about Neil Shapiro. I'm just going to tell you a couple things. I had the pleasure of working with Neil at ABC, where he was an ace reporter even as a kid, and was basically tending to one fabulous guy a lot of you may know, Richard Threlkeld, So I actually only got to do a story with Neil once when Threlkeld was on vacation. But I did also get to work with his lovely and brilliant wife, Juju Chang, who you may see on Nightline. They have 3 children. He has been, you name it, he's been the president of NBC News. He did everything at ABC, everything at NBC. And now he's in charge, in my view, of protecting the public trust and what little remains on the VHF spectrum is worth watching. So, Neil, please come up and take it from there. He's got carte blanche, as always. Oh, the other thing I meant to say is that everybody I know, and one of them I talked to last night who's worked with him, said, you know, Neil is that rare guy who proves, and I will probably offend somebody by swearing, proves you don't have to be a prick to be the boss. He's, as my friend said, doesn't have a mean bone in his body. Now, how many of us know people like that?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me. So I'm talking a little bit about my days in commercial TV and how I wandered into non-commercial television. But I thought I'd begin with this, with a moment, one of the most important moments of my life, and I wonder how many of you had a moment like it. I was 15, and I was editor of my high school paper, and I was sports editor of my high school paper, and I was the photographer of my high school paper, and I was the layout guy in my high school paper. And so they had an idea. They said, you know, we're going to try this thing. We're going to have students go out with with a grown-up, with some job they like to have, and they can shadow them. So I went with the sports reporter for the Knickerbocker News. We went to cover a basketball game, and then we walked back into the newsroom. I remember that moment walking in and hearing that sound of typewriters clanging away and the hum of the wire machines, and I felt like I belonged. I felt like this place is calling me, and I want to be in a place where you find out things first. I want to be in a place where there's exciting things going on, and I want to figure out how you can take all that excitement and then be the one to tell people what it all means. And I think that moment really galvanized on what I wanted to do in life. Now, I was been lucky in many, many ways in my life, in so many ways, but one is just kind of the time I was born. So I was in high school during Watergate. And if you remember then, the hearings were on TV. So I used to duck out of classes and run into the library and watch the hearings. And I couldn't wait to watch the hearings, and I'd go home and watch, at that point, public television was the only one doing it, watching the recap that night. And was struck by the challenges and how hard it is to take a whole long stretch and figure out what the important things and what weren't and how to cut it down. And I thought, you know, that really intrigues me too. So my incredible luck continued. The only thing I wanted to do is I realized I wanted to get in the news business, and you had to do anything and everything to get in. So I wanted to read the news on the local radio station. And to do it, I had to get my FCC disc jockey license, and I got it. And the deal was, they said, if you will do some of the worst shifts, then you can read the news. So the worst shifts are like midnight to 6, you know, horrible shifts. And I think I am probably the only Jewish DJ doing country gospel. But every Sunday morning I did that. And I had a great appreciation of the most important thing when you're a DJ is how long the songs are. And in country gospel, they're very long, so I love that. But I got to do the news, and I loved that. And then I went to Tufts University, and I once again ran the student paper there and loved that. And I always say to young people, you know, one of the most important things I think you can do is no matter what you aspire to do in journalism is learn how to write. Even if you never end up writing on the air, it's an incredible skill. And I'm still shocked now. I teach a little bit and lecture a little bit. One of the things I think that is increasingly lost is people who know how to write. And I'm not sure it's because now their grammar gets fixed automatically and their spelling mistakes get fixed automatically. But we're losing the ability of people to tell smart, cogent stories and lay them out in a logical way of thinking. I think we've gained a lot in terms of people's technical ability. People can produce things now by themselves. We have phones which can shoot your own things. You can transmit stories everywhere. So we live in an age where there's more information than ever before, and yet I worry, do we have enough smart people to tell us what it all means? So there I was at Tufts University trying to figure out what to do next, and I knew I wanted to be a newspaper person, or in journalism somehow. And I rented an auto typewriter. It was the very early days, if you remember, where nobody had those, and you could put in a program. So I wrote a program, Dear Editor, and why I wanted a job at your paper, and then I would go in and I would just change the editor and so forth, so I sent like 250 letters to newspapers. And I mostly got 240 adios. And I got a one call back from the paper in Omaha that emerged, the Omaha Telegram World something something Sentinel something something. And they wanted me to come out, and I got offered a job sight unseen at the Hudson Star in Hudson, New York. And I had an interview at the Washington Star, where they had this program where you could start as a clerk and maybe work your way up to reporter. And as it turns out, I think the Star didn't last much longer after I might have taken that job. Then for the heck of it, I wrote to the broadcast news divisions. I figured the presidents are way too busy, write to the vice presidents. The vice president I wrote to at ABC News was a Tufts grad, as was I. The president of ABC News had this college kid working for him, and my boss didn't. So he said, you know what, I want a college kid too. So he called me and said, here's the deal, I'm going to hire you for a year. I'm going to pay you virtually nothing. In this year, your job is to find another job, impress people. If not, I'll fire you. That's the deal. And it turns out he hired me literally in a commercial break. He hired me from 6:10, he offered the job, 6:11, I accepted. He went back to watching the news, and I started at ABC. Once again, I was lucky to hit the right place at the right time. I came to ABC News when it was the news division that was in ascension, and when broadcast news was, I think, probably still the golden age of journalism. At ABC News, it was great. Roone Arledge was running the place, and though there was some share of chaos that was a part of Roone, there was also a sense of vision and a real sense about the resources are there. So the fact that you could go off and cover anything and everything was really important, and the fact that you could try new things. And it was the days before news divisions were really expected to make money, and I had more experience with that as I got on in the business. But the prestige of being first made a lot of difference. At ABC News, they were third. So the idea of doing anything and everything to improve that was great. I got to work with great people. Some of them are here tonight. I got to work with great anchors. You know, one of the things I loved about the news business, and still think is great, is that I love the informality of it. I mean, I remember, that you would walk in and he wasn't Mr. Jennings, he was Peter. He wasn't Mr. Brinkley, he was David. Right? And the thing that I loved about TV, more than print actually, I thought print was lonely. I thought, when you covered a story, it was like back then it was you and your notepad and your typewriter, right, against the clock. And you'd finish it, and maybe the copy would do something, the editors would fix it, and off it would go. What I think is great about TV, at least the old kind of TV I grew up in, that it was this great team effort. And TV was only as good as everybody in the circle and as weak as the weakest link in it. And the funnest thing of being at TV was to have an idea and have someone say, I'm a producer, I have an idea, and the correspondent said, here, why don't we try this, it'll be better. And the cameraman would say, why don't we try shooting it like this, it'll be better. And the editor said, you've got this, why don't you put it like this? And the senior producer would say, why don't we change this? And when you got all done, it was often so much better than the first lame idea I had. Now, I'd like to say that happened all the time. Sometimes, I'm sure all of you know the other experience. You think you have a great idea, and it gets worse and worse as it goes along. But there are those rare things when it goes the other way. So in addition to kind of being in the right place at the right time, I also was guided by this principle, which is I was never going to make the same mistake twice, and I was going to try to work harder than anybody else I knew. And I pass that along to young people because I think that's often one of the things that makes this business great, is if you're determined, if you really learn at it, you can climb incredibly high up the ladder. The other thing is I was lucky enough to work with smart people, and I always found time when they weren't busy to ask them to tell me about their lives and what they did. And as I think you're hearing right now, everybody's favorite topic is themselves. So if you're smart in journalism, all of you have incredible stories to tell, how you got there, what you covered, and I thought that was great, kind of the oral tradition, to understand what they've been through, and I try to pass it along to other people I talk to. The things I think I was lucky about ABC, so I got at times, I said, where resources were much less important than covering important stories. So I was in the Philippines just before Ferdinand Marcos was about to leave. And we had an entire bureau in Manila. I mean, you would never have this kind of coverage today. 4 or 5 correspondents, lots of people. But at that time, even then, they said, we're spending too much money, we're going to scale it way down. They did, and the next day, martial law was declared in the Philippines. So we were massively undermanned. On the other hand, the excitement was that meant if you were a breathing body, you were up and working 24 hours a day. It was incredibly exciting to do that. And to know that, everybody else had much bigger army support. You were the one keeping ABC News in the game. Also, we were lucky enough to have a lot of anchors come in and do their work and leave. And I have to say, I was, and still astonished just how good the people who are at the top of their game are. People who would come in, either people like Peter Jennings or Ted Koppel knew the area pretty well anyway, but in no time could get a very quick read on what was happening. I'd watch them interview people, and their interviews were so smart. First, they were asked the right questions. They had a sense of timing, like while they did it, you could get all done, and they would say, I think the third answer, the fifth answer, and I'd cut this out of the seventh answer. And I'm like, wow, that's good. I was taking notes. I didn't get that. And they were flawless on the air. They also had this ability, which I wish I had, because it happens sometimes on 13, the ability to talk and get cues in your ear at the same time and not have people know what's happening. Right? It's really hard to talk and have someone count you down and make it seem effortless, and yet they did it. I was also lucky because one of the best stories I ever covered was one which how bad my reporter instincts were. I was in Berlin, or in Germany, covering a story about Carlos the Jackal. We were trying, as you remember, he's a terrorist, and some documents had come to light, and we were trying to follow his path around. And I was working for a show called Primetime Live. It was in its first year, Sam Donaldson, Diane Sawyer. The show was Thursday night. It was billed as Primetime Live. Everything was going to be live. So I'm minding my own business in Germany, dealing through some topics, and they call me and say, you know, the Berlin Wall is coming down. You have to get to Berlin. I'm like, let me tell you something. The Berlin Wall is not coming down. I know, you've got to go there. I said, all right, but this is a fool's errand. I go, and of course they were right, and indeed it was coming down. So I get there. Now, it's just me. There's no correspondence or anything. Tom Brokaw was there with NBC and had done a live special at Great at 10 o'clock, but at 9, I think at 9 o'clock, and Primetime Live was coming on at 10. We had nothing. So they say, here's what we want you to do. We want you to find a great story. Find two people who have been, reunited, and we'll interview them on top of the Berlin Wall. I said, it's 3 in the morning. Everybody here is unbelievably lubricated, right? So, and you want me to find two people, that's what we want. So I'm desperately trying to find, but in fact, I actually do find two people. I found a great story, Hansel and Gretel, let's call them, because I can't remember their names. So Hansel lives in West Germany, but he has a girlfriend in East Germany. They've seen each other very, very rarely, but they've been waiting for this day. She's going to come across the world, and they're going to get married the next day. Like, unbelievable. And the only hitch is Hansel speaks English, but Gretel doesn't. I think, this is a great story. I call him, and I'm yelling, because it's yelled, I'm yelling to control him. This is an unbelievable story. Just promise me one thing. She doesn't speak English. So don't go to her first. Go to him first. He'll translate. Got it? Got it. Am I clear about this? Because she doesn't speak English. Totally got it. Not to worry. And then I've had this kind of helpless feeling many of you have had in journalism when you seem to plan everything out, and you've done everything you can do, and yet in slow motion things don't go as you planned it. So in my earpiece, I hear the music, everything is perfect. I hear Diane Sawyer saying it's an incredible day, history being made before your eyes, and tonight an incredible love story, two people reunited. Gretel, let me begin with you. Like, no. And then she has a long question like, I think Socrates said to Aristotle, the meaning of love. And as she's talking, Gretel has this reaction that sometimes you hear when animals hear high-pitched noises they don't get. She's just like cocking her head, because she couldn't understand a word Diane says. And so Diane does what many of you do, which is to speak louder. So now she's like grimacing and not hearing it. So I see Hansel, and I go to him, right, which in TV we know means talk, but I think he thinks means I'm a duck. Right? So I'm like, and it seems, now the show's only an hour long. It seems to me we've been at this for like 2 hours. Eventually, he actually gets it up, and it goes fine. And it's not, and so we finally hit the first commercial break. I'm thinking, like, the great story, right? And the producer gets back in my ear and says, it'd be nice if you told us who to go to first. And so such things, we all have war stories like that. At ABC, next I moved, as I said, to Primetime Live, and I really fell in love with magazines. I'm sad to say, in fact, I get to live through the golden age of news magazines. Because when I was 3 years at Primetime Live, and then I went to Dateline, and then lucky enough, Dateline at its peak was on 5 nights a week, at a time when the networks loved news magazines. They loved it because drama was horrible and people weren't watching it anymore, and it got tired and trite, and news magazines were cheaper. And especially at Dateline, our thing was we're going to put news back in news magazine. So it was, you could do almost anything you wanted. And it was great to have the time, and it was great to appreciate what you can do with 2 cameras and how important the interviews are. And it was great to be, having left ABC and got recruited by NBC. I got there because you may remember a little scandal with the Dateline and a truck. The GM story, you all remember this story? In the course of that, everybody lost their job, the executive producer, the correspondent. So they'd hired me at NBC and said, do a new news magazine. But while you're waiting, this Dateline thing is a disaster. Could you just take it for a couple of weeks? So I did it, and the fact seemed like, this thing is up and running, and the American people had no memory at all. So Dateline kind of bounced back pretty quickly. And then they sort of added night after night after night. We're up 5 nights a week. And I think it's a good example about there's plenty of conventional wisdom. Often it's wrong. Often about journalism it's wrong. So I remember when we went from 1 night a week to 2 nights a week, my friends mainly at ABC News called and said, we're so sorry. And I said, why is that? He said, well, you'll never make this work. Nobody's ever done. You can't be on more than 1 night. It's impossible. It can't be done. It's going to be a disaster. And I think they said this because we were opposite Primetime Live, my old show. And I had the advantage of NBC's gigantic comedy lead-ins, and they didn't. So I said, I'm just going to give it a try. And the fact is, we both walloped ABC News, and we did incredibly well. And then they just kept adding more nights. And what I liked about it was we really could, first, the networks were so desperate to have us do it. There was much less second-guessing than you normally get. And there's plenty of it in television. But there was less second-guessing because actually it was a brave new world. They didn't know what they were doing either. So they were less likely to tell me how to do this. And that lasted for a couple years until they regained their footing and realized, all your hours are hours we in the entertainment division would like to have back. So we're going to start telling you what to do. There's only one time that I never ever heard from the entertainment division about wanting time back, and that was 9/11. When 9/11 happened, they recognized there's nothing we can put on the air. Everything's so irrelevant. You can have as much as you want. In fact, don't give us anything back. So we were on the air for a week. Said, sports doesn't want it back, entertainment, just keep going and going and going. Until finally we started to get entertainment programming back. One of the things that has changed in this world is minute-by-minute ratings. When I first started in TV, nobody had them. First you had ratings and you had quarter-hour ratings. When you get minute-by-minute ratings, it's a tricky bit of business because literally you can see your entire show minute by minute. You can see it drop during commercial breaks, you can take up. The best thing you want to see is this, from your point of view, the steady climb from beginning to end. The worst thing you want to see are these high and then you lose your lead-in, or these kind of bows in your story, which means you're probably not telling it very well. There's an upside to this, which is if you're trying to figure out how to be a great storyteller, and you use, I would say, this stuff for good, and figure out what's the best way to tell my story in a way which I can use the good parts of fiction, that is, characters that make a difference, suspense, things involved in any good storytelling, and use it to tell an important tale, that's a great thing. And I remember, did some documentaries where we did something about I think AT&T or somebody had huge layoffs, and we followed 3 workers over time for 2 years to see what happened to them. When we did stories like, we realized, if you resolved like story 1, then story 2, then story 3, the ratings would kind of drop a little bit. But if you kind of told 7/8 of each story and then came back for the last 1/8 of all 3 of them, they would stay, because if people didn't care about character 2, still wanted to see what happened with character 1. So to me, that's a great idea, right? I learned a smart thing about what the audience cared about, but I didn't have to give up quality. The downside of this, when I finally got to be president of NBC News, and that was my job for the last 5 years at NBC, everybody gets to see these minute-by-minute ratings, and everybody gets to tell you what's wrong with them, and everybody gets to tell you, you need more diet stories that hit women 18 to 34 in Dayton. We're getting killed on that. And that is unproductive. And I think that's one of the issues we have, is there's more and more data out there. There's more and more people to kind of tell content producers what they ought to be doing. And what we're losing in there is, when nobody knew what we're doing, it was much easier to try new things. It was much easier to do things that we needed to know if they would succeed or not, which I think is part of the reason why I love WNET. There's a great thing about doing the work of the angels. There's a great thing about saying ratings are important because we want to know who's watching, but they're not the only thing that matters. And in fact, the most important thing is, great media, great television ought to touch you in 2 ways. It ought to touch you in your head and your heart. It ought to make you think, and it ought to touch your soul in some way. And if you can do both, you're telling a great tale. Commercial television doesn't care about any one of those. Commercial television cares about eyes. How many people are watching? Increasingly, maybe they'll start to care about how many people are watching and what are they buying. But they don't care about any more than that, which is why there's been this incredible rush to reality programming. Like 65% of television is reality. Because even though nobody can remember from one year to the next who got kicked off the island or which bored housewife got divorced, nobody remembers that. Right? But they'll come back and watch more, and they'll watch it over and over again. Where the stuff that I love about public television, it's about your soul. It really is about programs that change people's lives. And I did a lot of great stuff that I'm proud of in my commercial television career, and privileged to cover a lot of great stories. But in all that time, people didn't stop me on the subway and say, thank you for changing my life. I never heard stories from people that said, I was an immigrant to this country, and my family were taught to speak English because of you. My daughter's valedictorian because of what your station did. People stop me in the theater and say, my significant other was dying, and the only comfort he or she had was watching some of your programs, or couldn't leave the house, but thanks to you, we got to go to places we'll never, ever get a chance to see in real life. We've changed our slogan to Media with Impact, because I think one of the differences between what we do and a lot of other things you see on TV is it really does touch people's lives. In the same way that hospitals have grateful patients because it saves lives, public television does that too. Public television really can make our country smarter, more thoughtful, help people find their way, find their calling, find their passions. Someone came up to me recently and said, I grew up in a very poor home in the Bronx. We had no resources. My parents both worked 2 jobs, but we had a little black and white TV. And I watched great performances and live from Lincoln Center. And thanks to you, I had a front row seat for all this great art. And now I'm a professional dancer. And that wouldn't have happened without you. Someone else said to me, you know what, I'm a marine biologist. Once again, very humble beginnings, but I watch nature. And that showed me that's what I wanted to do. To have that kind of impact is really, as Alan suggested, part of the public trust. And I think we take it seriously. We think it's a real obligation. At the same time, what I've tried to do is say, how can I help make that obligation sustainable? And are the things I can learn from my commercial life which help public television? I would say it's about any institution, but when people work only in one place for a very long time, they tend to do things the same way. When I got to public TV, my successor was a very smart fellow who had been there 20 years. Many people who had worked for him had been there for 40 or 50 years. So I remember we were talking about some story, and I said to one of the senior people, could this go viral? And she said, what do you mean? You mean on the internet? I said, yeah. She goes, I'm not really into that. Well, so we've had to have some changes in that. We've also had to be more efficient because, as I said, now you can do more and more. My goal is to say to everybody out there, I want to take your hard-earned contributions and say, I want to be as efficient as I can. I want to put them on the screens, whether it's your TV or your computer screen or your iPad or your phone, and I want to give it to all the talented people behind the scenes who are working on it, and I want to cut out everything else in between. I want to see if we can make the machines more efficient. I want to see if we can make the editing process more efficient, because I think that's where the future that we have to go. We're also going to think about how the media world is changing. You know, we live in a time when I first started, the only thing that mattered is when something was scheduled. Now, increasingly, people watch something when they want to see it. And that's the way TV is going to move. And the question we're going to have, both in journalism and entertainment writ large, is so much of what we've done is still legacies from established platforms. So much of what you see online is based on somebody else's work. So as important as aggregators are, they're not doing anything. They're not actually employing journalists. They're taking other people's work and putting it in one place. We have to find a way to pay journalists to do what they do. And that's vitally important, whether that's what public media can do by raising contributions or what private media is going to have to do. We need to find a way to keep it vibrant, because at the end of the day, you know, we are the public watchdogs. At the end of the day, as great as to have people with lots of opinions, somebody's got to be digging through documents, somebody's got to be covering City Hall. I don't think that's going to be something bloggers can do. And I think more and more it's going to be something public media can do. On the radio side, you really see NPR is really the only game in town. Right? The market forces have dictated there's really no market for widespread commercial all-news radio, or in-depth radio in the way NPR does. I think no one's doing that. And I don't know what's going to happen on the commercial side either, but I think you're starting to see less and less of that on the broadcast side, and hopefully more of a place for us. The other thing I think there's huge market failure is arts and culture. Now, for years, that has never really worked in commercial television. Some of you go back to the early days of Omnibus, remember there were attempts at it. But the answer is you really can't get numbers on it. And commercial television is a numbers game. It's not what they're not about doing anything else. So more and more, that's what we need to do. But an example where technology has helped us do something we couldn't do years ago. So we have pioneered putting off-Broadway shows back on television. It's something called Theater Close-Up. We did 8 of them last year. We have more in production now. So 2 stories about how great this is in terms of media with impact. The first show we did won the Tony for Best Revival. It's at the Mint Theater. If you've ever been there, if they had sold every single seat in the run of the show and they didn't, it would have been 7,000 seats. The first week we put it on, 120,000 people saw it, right? More than ever saw it in the life of the play. The moment the play was off the air, people went online and started signing up for subscriptions for next year. So we benefited the audience and we benefited the theater. Hopefully we, in the long run, benefit smart young actors and directors and a new generation of great contributors. The next play we did was Hellman versus McCarthy, about the real-life legal suit between Hellman and McCarthy based on her appearance on the Dick Cavett show, and Dick Cavett played himself in the play. And that was an even smaller theater, the Abington Theater. If they sold every single seat in that theater, and they didn't, it would have been 2,400 seats. But 200,000 people have seen that in the time we've had it. That theater was going to be in the red, and after we put it on the air, it was in the black. These, to me, are the things that public television can do. And it's made possible because people like you support us. And I think part of our goal is to say, how can we tell you what we're doing and tell our story better? Ironically, one of the things that public TV doesn't do, and we try to do better, is tell our own story. We tell everybody else's story pretty well. We don't tell enough of what we do. One other thing we do, one of my biggest surprises, maybe the biggest surprise when I got to public television, is they had an education department. I worked in TV my whole life, never had an education department. What do you guys do? So one of the things we do is we take all the work you do and we cut it up into little bite-sized bits, and we integrate it with lesson plans. And it's made free of charge to students and teachers in New York State and now around the country. And you can use anything to teach anything. So, for example, when we were kids and we went to vocabulary in English as opposed to word acquisition and language arts, and the word was ambidextrous, the teacher should write ambi and dextrous on the board. She'd write the Latin roots of the word. She'd say, who knows what it means? The really smart kids, we get it. The not so smart kids, we get it. After the smart kids, the kids not paying attention, never learn the word. Took about 3 minutes to do all that. Here's what we do. We say, kids, we're going to learn a new word today. The word's ambidextrous. I want you to watch the screen, whether it's a whiteboard or something you downloaded, and we're going to watch 2 minutes of an orangutan from nature. And I want you to pay attention to how this orangutan moves. Now, everybody has this leaning forward moment because kids love video and kids love animals. Now everybody's watching it. And then there's a study guide written by teachers, for teachers of any ability, where together they're going to have structured questions, and the class is together going to learn the word ambidextrous, and they're going to learn see the Latin roots of the word at the end, and they're going to have a visual picture that they can associate with the word. And everybody's going to learn it. And it's a much better way to teach. You know, I think there are two things that are true about the environment we live in. One is we are being in the information age. There's a glut of information. You know, if you think what a lot of us did as journalists, where so much of your job was just finding things out. I remember the time I spent just actually getting information as opposed to going Google. Right? On the other hand, there's a glut of information, and finding out what is true and what's believable is a different set of skills. The other thing is, because we have so much media, so much video, the question is, can we use it for other things than just what it was intended to? And I think there's a whole golden age of learning, a whole golden age of citizen involvement. One of the things we know in public television is that the people watch over-index in terms of people who vote, people who write op-eds, people who are civically engaged. And so it's not just a matter, once again, media with impact. You're just watching some story. It's I can use this story. I can use it to link to other people. I can create my own communities. I can find people who think we've got to do something about an issue or not. Right? I care about climate change. I care about fracking, whatever it is. And you can take this video and it can be part of the dialogue. You can spur smarter and smarter thinking. One of the hugest issues I think we have in this media explosion is we live in a time, now more than ever, where you can create your own ecosphere that will agree with everything you think. If you have a point of view, right now there's a channel for you that will pretty much reinforce whatever you think. And you can find magazine articles that will do it, and you can sign up for alerts that will do it. And the problem for our society and the problem for democracy is we live in a world of change. So even if you are right, even if we do know what the abstract right place to be is, you may not be right tomorrow or the next day because the world changes. One of the things I love about public media is we have no positions. Right? We're not advocating anything, and hopefully we find people who want to find that. But I worry this world where we create young people who get information for free, information they don't have they value equally, no matter where it comes from, and social media which only reinforces their points of view, and places huge comfortable living rooms where they can be like-minded people who all tell them the same thing. That's going to be a tough place in the shifting world. But lastly, you know, being as lucky as I've been my whole life, lucky to be in this business I love, is also incredibly optimistic. You know, back to my story, I grew up in doing duck and cover drills under my desk. Right? When I went to college, I studied the Soviet Union because I believed that our eternal twilight struggle would be with the Soviet Union. Right? And I lived to see the Berlin Wall come down. So I think things are changing. And for all the interesting things about media and where we are, I think it can be a force for good. I still think there's nothing more powerful than the combination of words and pictures used together. And when they're used by smart, caring people, they can do great things. So thank you so much for your time, and I'd love to take some questions.